Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back to a very interesting, hopefully, panel discussion that I'm going to have with two gentlemen from the European Union and from ASEAN. We're going to be talking about six topics that have been discussed over the last few months with all of you, the young leaders and others who participate in this fascinating conversation. We're going to be talking about economic perspectives of the EU-ASEAN relationship, security, democratic governance, connectivity, health, COVID-19, of course, and also people-to-people relations. Now, let me introduce these gentlemen to you very, very briefly. I'll be talking to Peteris Ustup's. He's Director for Middle East, Asia, and Pacific from the European Commission's Directorate General for International Partnerships. Welcome, Peteris. And also talking... Yeah, hi. And also talking to Mr. Balakumar Palaniappan, is currently Director for External Relations at the ASEAN Political Security Department. So welcome to both of you. Good morning, Peteris. Good afternoon, Balakumar. And as I said to all of you watching us, this is interactive. So please start sending your questions. As I said, short questions, please, because I need to put them to our two panelists, and I'd like to be able to take as many questions from you as possible. Now, we've discussed in the previous conversation, we've talked about digital partnerships, we've talked about inclusivity, we've talked about smart cities, and we've talked about infrastructure connectivity. But here I want to look forward. And as we've said, throughout these few months, EU and ASEAN have just celebrating 45 years of their partnership, of their relationship. They've signed an ambitious strategic partnership agreement. And of course, there's a summit happening in Brussels on December 14 that we're all looking forward to, a very important milestone in this EU-ASEAN relationship. A lot has happened in these 4 decades that we've been working together. And let's look at actually ahead, and let's look at what's going to be happening in the coming, let's say, 5 to 10 years. What is happening now is actually rather disturbing. We have a war in Europe, Russia's war against Ukraine. We have heightened tensions between the United States and China in the world, but also in the region where ASEAN is, the Indo-Pacific. And we're also seeing examples of violation of rule of law, democracy, and human rights in both ASEAN and the European Union. So Peteris, if I could turn to you first, looking ahead, what do you see as the 3 main geopolitical challenges that the EU faces? And what do you see as the opportunities for us here in the European Union? The screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the possibility to be with you this morning or afternoon. And as you said, we are in very interesting times living together. We are looking forward to host the EU-ASEAN summit later this year, still in 2 months' time, here in Brussels. And as you also mentioned, this will be commemorative summit, 45th anniversary of establishing our relations. And that is really a good time to celebrate. Having said that, something to mention as well, back in 2020, late 2020, both sides, EU and ASEAN, agreed to elevate our bilateral relations to strategic partnership. This means that actually we have a new kind of relations, and not with too many around the world we have those. That demonstrates that we want to be really close in everything what we do. You ask about geopolitical situation and main geopolitical challenges that we face, and let me mention a few points. First of all, I think the upholding fundamental values is something what really should be on the top of the priority list. We all know and we follow the developments. Russia's war, aggressive war against Ukraine is, of course, at the top of our diplomatic priorities. But by defending Ukraine, we are defending the core principles of the United Nations and the respect of international law, sovereignty, and the independence of the countries. So for us, this is, I think, the priority #1 and the biggest challenge I think everyone, each and every sovereign country around the world is facing as we speak. Climate change adaptation and mitigation would be the second one I would like to mention. Secretary General Antonio Guterres has rightly referred that current global environment as a perfect storm. I think so many elements at the moment are, let's say, put together in the same basket, and they really somehow start to influence us very, very heavily. We have record temperatures, we have floods, we have droughts all over the continents, and climate change wreaks the havoc. We see that over 300 million people in 82 countries are food insecure, and the number of refugees worldwide are on the rise. So, and we should talk probably on this point more on the climate change refugees than of the crisis refugees. Third point I would like to mention, addressing the macroeconomic instability in imbalances. I think what we see right now, and then the different kind of crises really show us very clearly that many countries around the globe are now caught in the debt trap. And it is even more exacerbated because of the inflationary pressure, what is put on many countries and their economies. Fourth point, still recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic. Somehow probably our feeling is that this is already behind us, but there are so many places around the globe, specifically probably global south, where actually we see that this recovery is still taking place. And on top of that, this recovery is uneven. We need to take that into account, and I think it is also linked with the fact that there has not been the right distribution of the vaccines around the globe. And fifth point I would like to mention is pursuing 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The Global Human Development Index has regressed for the second year in a row, and this should be, let's say, very significant warning light for all of us that the achievements we thought we have actually are regressing. That is not the place we would like to be just 8 years before the SDG agenda should be achieved. All the elements, either this would be democracy, women empowerment, human rights, all are under the threat. So I will stop there. And I have more comments, but probably coming in later, Elizabeth. Thank you.
Sure, no, thank you, Petris. Thank you very much. Yes, of course, we have 45 minutes now that you are staying till the end to talk about the other issues, but you've already pointed to some very important elements of today's geopolitical landscape. Bala, if I could ask from your perspective, working in ASEAN, your view of what is currently happening and what you fear and see as the worst kind of challenges for the region, for the ASEAN region. Screen is yours.
Thank you, Shana. Good afternoon from Jakarta, and good morning to all of you there. Indeed, as my colleague from the EU state, Petros, we look forward very much to the ASEAN-EU Commemorative Summit in Brussels on the 14th of December. I know our friends in Brussels have lined up a range of activities for us. I think, as mentioned previously, what is more important is we are waiting to see, get the guidance from our leaders as to set the future direction of ASEAN-EU relations. We are strategic partners currently, but there are things that we can do more to further strengthen the relations. On our part, in this part of the world, as I see it, as you mentioned, Shada, is one of the biggest challenges we face in this part of the world is on peace and stability, particularly the peace dividend that this region, Southeast Asia, ASEAN, has been enjoying for some years now. We cannot take this peace and stability that we enjoy for granted. As you know, our region here, we are at the crossroads of major power rivalry. The geopolitical landscape is not very favorable right now. It's increasingly becoming polarizing and challenging. And on our part, we have been engaging our external partners on its merit, and we want to remain open and inclusive in engaging all our partners, be it the major powers or other partners and friends of ASEAN, including the European Union. So we basically don't want to be drawn in the major power rivalry. We don't want to taking sides or being asked to take sides. This is something we really want to avoid. We want to remain open and engage all our partners. This is the strength of ASEAN, I must say. As you would have heard time and again, this word called ASEAN centrality. We assess this point of ASEAN centrality where we try to bring in major powers, partners, friends, like-minded countries to work and contribute to peace and stability of the region. So you have also heard about the convening power of ASEAN. We have many ASEAN-led regional mechanisms that we have put in place, and we want to further strengthen these mechanisms and use these mechanisms to bring our partners and friends to dialogue, to cooperate, to engage us in this region. So by doing so, we are of the view that we can contribute to peace and stability of the region. And we also want, as we speak, there are many mechanisms have been established in this region now. There's new terminology, or not really new terminology, that's called Indo-Pacific. I think all our partners, including our friends in Europe, they have European Union, they have their own Indo-Pacific strategy. We in ASEAN, we do have our own Indo-Pacific strategy. We call ASEAN Outlook on the Indo-Pacific. So we also would also like to use this initiative of ASEAN to engage our partners. While our partners may have their own initiatives, but what we are asking from our partners is come here, work with us, talk to us, contribute, engage us, and work constructively with us. So we all can work towards peace and stability of the region. As mentioned by Petros, I think the other preoccupation of ASEAN is recovering better from the pandemic, both on the health side as well as on the economic side. As many of us would like to think that the pandemic is over and we are almost back to the normal life, pre-pandemic life, I think there's a lot more to be done. And ASEAN, we on our part, we have this ASEAN comprehensive recovery framework, which we are using as a guide, as a roadmap for us to recover from the pandemic and better. At the same time, ASEAN, following the pandemic, we have put in place regional, it's a long name. In short form, we call it APHID. It's a regional center for pandemic. It's called ASEAN Center for Public Health Emergencies and Emerging Diseases. So it will have its main secretariat in Thailand and Bangkok, and then 2 other offices both in Jakarta and in Vietnam. And here we very much look forward to working with our partners to on the health front to address any future pandemic that may come our way. So we are better prepared in terms of health. So these are some of the things that we are preoccupied currently on our side. And lastly, on my side, I would also like to stress the climate is indeed a very important agenda on ASEAN. The current chair of ASEAN, Cambodia, they have put it as their priority, and I think climate will remain an important priority for ASEAN. As we see the climate change and the climate agenda is in the forefront of the global committee, so do here in ASEAN. So these are some of the things that I would like to put out there for our participants to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Bala and Petrus as well. And please do bring in your questions, young leaders and those watching, because I want to bring them to Petrus and Bala for their responses. Let's look at this summit that we are talking about, the commemorative summit in December 14, preceded by a young leaders discussion, also by a business summit. Petrus, what would you say are some of the opportunities of working together with the ASEAN and Europe? What are some of the opportunities that this summit should explore? Coming together, I think in these challenging times is in itself quite a feat. We haven't had in-person meetings for so long. We've got used to working online, but this is a very unique opportunity to actually literally bang our heads together, if you like. So if you were to just say, a wish list, and I would say not more than 3 things where we can really chart out something innovative for this relationship we have, this partnership we have.
Thank you, Shada. First of all, I think, as Bala already alluded, there is a lot of, let's say, parallel tracks and interlinking and the same kind of approaches what the EU and ASEAN has in between. So in many ways, this is the joint approach of the like-minded, I think. And we would like to see that also as the outcome of the summit. There is a lot of similarities between EU and ASEAN outlook on the Indo-Pacific and the EU strategy for the cooperation in Indo-Pacific. This is how we see that actually geopolitically we see things in very similar way happening in the region. And of course, we always stress that point from our side that there is a strong commitment from our side on the ASEAN centrality when the things are developed in the region. So that is what we would like to send as a message from the EU leaders also to the summit. More than that, I think, is on the agenda, and we need to dwell into more details. First of all, as I alluded already at the beginning, there is a lot happening and influencing us. What is green transition? What is climate change? Of course, those topics are not new, but I think the developments around the globe really requires us to make sure that actually we really cooperate on them. The European Green Deal is set out. It is there. We are moving forward with implementation, and my strong feeling is that actually ongoing war, Russia's aggressive war in Ukraine, will advance our global transition, energy transition in Europe, and it will happen by far faster than probably many anticipated. But having said that, this opens also many opportunities for cooperating between EU and ASEAN to make sure that green transition is not only words in the declaration, but there are also active cooperation between, let's say, entities, governments, investment banks, that a lot of activity is dedicated to this. Secondly, again, that keyword is not new, but connectivity is something we need to dwell into as well. And connectivity entails so many things. But I think what we need to put as the priority is digital connectivity. There is a lot what COVID pandemics taught us. There is a lot what we face as the new realities. There is a lot of digital technology developments around the world we need to take into account. And digital development is something what will determine the 21st century economies, societies, and as we talk with young leaders, that will be the main reality of the economies we will face in 21st century. So once we approach the connectivity part, a lot of dedication to digital transformation is something what needs to come out from the summit. And last but not least, I think the understanding of the risks of global system to the global system. I see and then I hear very clearly what Bala is saying, that ASEAN is not in a position or don't want to take sides, but once the global, let's say, rules-based system is under attack, I think there should be a strong messages deriving from international partners like EU and ASEAN that actually this endangers entire political setting around the world, not only political, it endangers also security setting around the world. That message of strong support to international rules-based order is something I would like to see as the outcome from the summit coming up in December. Thank you. Over for me.
Thank you, Petrus. Thank you very much indeed. And you talked about the digital connectivity, and there's, I have to say, a very, very good paper that one of the young leaders has just presented on digital connectivity that I think is really worth reading, and also on connectivity, in fact, and how the EU can actually compete more effectively against the Belt and Road Initiative across Southeast Asia, which I think is really worth reading for all our policymakers, indeed. Bala, if I could come to you as well, and from your point of view, without going into too much detail, ASEAN leaders, of course, 10 countries with very different agendas, but coming together on certain key issues of climate change, ASEAN centrality, and of course, digital cooperation. What kind of messages do you think your leaders will want to send when they are here in Brussels?
Thank you, Shada. Thank you, Petros, as well. I think first thing is, as we talked about earlier, and I think Petros has clearly outlined, I think ASEAN is all for multilateralism, international law, rule of law, sovereignty, independence of states. I think we are very much on the same page here. And this is a strong message I think will have to be put out together by ASEAN and EU, because we are all multilateral organizations, and these are very important principles of international relations that we dearly uphold to ourselves. I think this is an important message that will come out of the summit. As I mentioned earlier, peace and stability, the centrality of ASEAN, and the messy geopolitical landscape of the region. I think this is all needs to be addressed in view of the importance of peace and stability. So that's my first point. On the second point is definitely, as we talked a little earlier, is how do we recover from the adverse impact of the pandemic? This is very important. This is an area where both ASEAN and EU can deepen our investment and trade ties. In this regard, I think on our part, on the part of ASEAN, we very much looking forward some form of guidance from the leaders in terms of setting out a framework for future ASEAN-EU FTA. I think this is, I think both sides should intensify our efforts towards an ambitious FTA that will send a strong signal from both regional organizations, our commitment to multilateral trading system. I think this is an important message I hope our leaders can pay due attention to. The third point I also mentioned earlier is about health. I think this is another area both ASEAN and EU can work together, particularly there are a lot more things for us to learn from the EU and ASEAN. As I said earlier, have established our ASEAN Center for Public Health Emergencies, and this center is very new, and here is another area that we can work together as we prepare ourselves, particularly in ASEAN, against any future pandemic that may, or infectious diseases that may come our way. And my fourth point is, I think Petros has very clearly mentioned, it's about connectivity. And we both ASEAN and EU have issued a joint ministerial statement on connectivity, and the EU's own Global Gateway initiative that was launched in December last year. I think these are all platforms that we can work together to bring mutual benefits, particularly in addressing a very important area for us is the digital divide, climate resilience, clean energy, smart transport network, and digital education. So these are the areas I think in terms of connectivity that we can look at together. And my fifth point is on climate. I think we are all for green transition, circular economy, and also we know that the EU's Green Deal is there. We look forward working with the EU in climate. So this is my fifth point. And lastly, I would like to also emphasize that I think the leaders will give a particular importance to stronger people-to-people links to help bridge the cultural differences between the two regions, as well as ties should extend beyond political leaders to look at business, journalists, students, officials, researchers, young groups. So these are people who will build or give the strong foundation to the partnership between ASEAN and EU. I think while we work on all other important areas, we should not forget the people-to-people ties that we should build as we strengthen our relationship moving forward. Thank you, Shada. These are some of the points that I'd like to put out there. Thank you.
Thank you both. And Bala, thank you for mentioning the importance of people-to-people connections and connectivity. And this is what the Young Leaders Forum is all about, to bring their ideas to the fore. And some of them you've discussed already, but there's a very interesting question that's come in, and I want to put it to you now. So just to both of you, and it's in the wake of the volatile energy prices caused by the ongoing war, what are the EU ambitions and expectations with the ASEAN as regards the energy sector? So unlike some of the neighbors close to the EU, ASEAN has its limitations on the physical energy trade to the European Union. So as we've seen, energy crises across the world are rising, of course, and of course the issue is how are we going to cope with this rise and what it means for our economies, basically what it means for our people. And there's another question that's come up as well, which I think is worth your answering as well. It's about sustainable development, and it was the point, of course, Peteris, that you made about, you know, the fact that we're only eight years away, and thanks for pointing that out. Sometimes we forget that 2030 is not that far away, and we've set ourselves certain milestones we have to achieve, but we're not doing that. And the question is really about focusing on the economic and social aspects of sustainability. And I think you mentioned some of them, education, gender, etc. So before I go back to my questions, I think it would be quite interesting to get your responses to some of these, I think, very relevant questions from our participants. Bala, can I go to you first about these two issues?
Thank you very much. I will start with energy and energy prices. I think from one side, the ongoing crisis, energy crisis, and unfortunately we learned in a very drastic way how energy can be used as the coercive instrument towards our economy. Probably we were blinded for a while as the EU that we have to revisit our energy mix. And this is also something what the rest of the world, including ASEAN, can learn in current circumstances from the EU, that in order to avoid any kind of future crisis, let's say very prudent planning and approach, not only 1 year ahead of us, but many probably decades ahead of us. Energy mix is something what determines your independence and your future development, your possibilities to compete in global markets. So, as I said at the beginning, we will be, let's say, have a generational leap probably in green technologies happening in Europe faster than anyone else expected. And I would say that this is something what we are looking forward to as a cooperation with our partners in ASEAN. There is a lot what we can bring already to the table with the technologies, with our approach to the renewable energies. And I think that this possible cooperation, this possible engagement needs to be expanded also within the ASEAN. This is not to say that we are coming with imposing any kind of solutions. No, it is with understanding that ASEAN economies are going to expand very rapidly in coming years, including there is a huge energy gap, I think, in the countries, and therefore the question is how ASEAN is going to bridge it.
Right.
And therefore,
if I may, yeah,
yes,
thank ahead. You. Yeah, please, Petrus, go ahead. I wanted to get Bala's reaction to what you said about how to deal with this, but please finish your sentence, of course.
And then our approach and possibilities of working together on green solutions, I think, is something what we would like to bring to the table, saying, let's work together. This is not only about energy sovereignty, it is also about common goals addressing the climate change. This is what needs to guide our principles. But if they are merged together, I think then we are by far more stronger. Thank you very much. I will return to the second question on socio-economic issues later on. Over for me.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Petrus. I wanted to get Bala's reaction to what has been said about green energy transition and renewables. And as I understand it, I think these are priorities for ASEAN as well. So where are the common ground that we can find together?
Thank you, Shada. I don't claim to be an expert in energy or all these subjects. I'll try my best. Indeed, sustainable development in terms of energy. We are talking about energy. It is indeed something, the energy price is affecting everybody. It's not only affecting Europe. We are also equally affected by the energy price, and we are suffering from it indeed. And related to that is everything else goes up, the inflation is there. So it is a big challenge for us. When we are talking about, as Petrus mentioned, we are also working very hard on the sustainable development front, particularly on green energy, circular economy, energy transition. All of these are important and we are working on it. And I think, as I said a little earlier during the second part of the Q&A, this is something I think our leaders will be giving attention to when they meet in Brussels in December. And I hope that currently we are already working with the EU on a number of projects and programs on climate and the environment, and also on the working towards collaborating with the EU's European Green Initiative. So there are all these things that we know. This is right in front of us. Is now how do we put all these things into action, into formidable cooperation programs and projects, and support each other. So this is something I think we cannot run away. I don't think the summit is going to, overlook this important area, whether it's energy price or whether it's the sustainable development. If I can use this time also to say a few words on sustainable development, we are very much focused on this. With two important things I would like to mention here is ASEAN. We have this ASEAN Center for Sustainable Development in Bangkok, in Thailand, and so Thailand is the coordinator in ASEAN for sustainable development. So we are pursuing this initiative. We call it complementarities initiative between the UN SDG 2030 and ASEAN's own sustainable development goals. So these things are being done through the center in ASEAN, whether in all areas, whether it's environment, whether it's energy, whether it's in connectivity. Sustainable development has become an important agenda in ASEAN, if I may say so. And this is pursued, irrespective who is the chair of ASEAN, but this is being addressed right now in ASEAN. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Petrus, yes, of course, the screen is yours now.
Yeah, just to add what we just discussed, that actually we are beyond the point of just words saying that we would like to cooperate, and this is what preoccupies our minds. There are programs in place, and we are elaborating them as Bala said already. So first of all, we have Green Team Europe initiative in partnership with ASEAN and Southeast Asia, which is worth of 30 million euros. And we are putting it together. What the content is there. It is not our own initiative. We are underlying it is in partnership with ASEAN to see how the green agenda might be advanced. And second important element and program at the moment with us is the ASEAN Catalytic Green Finance Facility, which is worth of our contribution to this catalytic fund is 50 million. Again, seeing how we can co-finance different loans and make sure that access to the green technologies are facilitated. So we are beyond that point, let's say, that we are just talking about it. And last but not least, on energy and green transition, as you know, the COP27 is approaching very fast, and we work with several countries in the region, including specifically, I would like to mention Vietnam and Indonesia, on the projects which we call just energy transitions partnerships. With those countries finding and this is again, governments should come with the projects, what needs to be financed, how to ensure that there is a green transition and just the green transition. And then the partners from the G7 are kicking in with a strong financial support. The priorities on our side in the ASEAN region at the moment are Vietnam and Indonesia. So, and beyond that, we are looking at the summit as the occasion when all of this is discussed in details and also setting, let's say, the priorities on green agenda for the years to come. Over.
Thank you very much, Petrus. So, Bala, if I could come to you, and one of the issues that has been discussed in the last few months of the Young Leaders Forum is, of course, the economic side of this partnership. And economics, as we know, has been really the backbone of EU's engagement with Asia and vice versa. And now we're talking about a situation where the economic integration in Asia is gaining speed with RCEP and many other initiatives that are there. And I was just wondering, do you think that, and of course the EU is engaged in negotiations, has several bilateral FTA agreements, free trade agreements with ASEAN countries, but is also working on a broader agenda of an EU-ASEAN FTA. And I was just wondering, from your side, sitting in Jakarta and overlooking ASEAN relations, what do you think are the chances of maybe perhaps the leaders in December agreeing to sort of launch this more ambitious stage in this economic discussion.
Thank you, Shada. On our part, as I mentioned earlier, we have been pushing for an ASEAN-EU FTA, region-to-region FTA. If we can achieve this, this is something very good. I think there's some discussions that have taken place in the past, and it has been resurfaced now, and we very much look forward. Just before this engagement, I had an engagement with one of the member states of the EU. I was also talking to them about the ASEAN-EU FTA. I hope the member states of the EU will give the push towards this region-to-region FTA. And we hope that this will be one of the major outcomes of the summit in December. So we very much look forward to this region-to-region FTA, as I said earlier, as the world recover from the pandemic, and we need to show a strong sense of multilateralism, a fair international trading system, and we need to push towards this ASEAN-EU FTA, an ambitious one. I know in the past there were some challenges to the ambition level, but I think ASEAN, as you mentioned earlier, we have done the RCEP earlier this year that came into force, and we welcome our partners and friends to utilize the FTA, the RCEP. But nevertheless, I think the ASEAN-EU region-to-region FTA is important, equally important. So we look forward to this FTA to being one of the major deliverables of the summit. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Bala. So, Petrus, I wanted to ask you a response to that, but also the wider question of where we're going with ASEAN in terms of economic partnership, because the young leaders are very interested, obviously, in the Green Deal that you have talked about, the post-COVID recovery, or the recovery, and also about connectivity. And there is, of course, this idea that somehow the global gateway is really just, not just, but really meant to be a competitor for the Belt and Road Initiative of China. But as many have said in these discussions, connectivity is a major issue for ASEAN. There's a connectivity master plan. So are there any possibilities that you are looking at where you could actually synergize, align the global gateway with the connectivity master plan and work together? Or are you perhaps already doing so?
Thank you, Shada. On this point, first of all, as you covered briefly also the trade agenda. So just last week, Executive Vice President Dombrovskis visited the region. He had a row of discussions with the partners on free trade agreements. More specifically, we would expect some movement forward in our negotiations with Indonesia. Of course, we are implementing already our FTAs with Singapore and Vietnam. So I see that there is, let's say, dynamics, as you mentioned, and Malaysia is having their own internal discussions on what to do with trade in wider context, either and when joining CPTPP. So this is another interesting development, what we need to take into account in when discussing the trade relations. In terms of trade relations, we can't, let's say, disconnect from wider context. And there again, I think the developments what ask us to be very precise and strong on trusted supply chains is something we need to pick up as well. I think we see the diversification of EU investments in the region. There is more widespread coverage of EU economical presence across the ASEAN, somehow indicating that EU is very strongly interested in those trusted supply chains to be developed. And of course, that immediately brings us to the next point, global gateway and investments around the globe. It covers many fields of activity. Either this is infrastructure, either those are the green energy related, either those are digital, or it would be port related or anything else. Our portfolio of an activity in ASEAN is very strong, covering hydropower generation in different countries. Either those would be power lines, either those would be considerations for digital connectivity, not going into details what kind of projects those would be. But all those considerations are part now in Brussels as we discuss the global gateway and unfolding it to the region. So we see Global Gateway as important part which links green transition, which brings forward the digital transition, which brings forward the trade relations. So all of that is encompassed in our policies of Global Gateway. That is something what we can't disconnect, and that is our new mantra and our vision of the development, our relations with ASEAN.
Thank you, Petrus. So having followed this relationship for maybe not the entire 45 years, but at least perhaps 3 decades, that 45 years, I have to say I've seen the relationship growing, deepening, widening, broadening, and becoming much more interactive than it ever was before. So we're reaching a very important stage in our relationship, if I could say so. I have 8 minutes left for this conversation because both of you gentlemen have to leave. So I'm going to come to the key issue of the Young Leaders Forum, which is bringing the voices of young people, young Europeans and young Asians into this conversation, which is among policymakers, business leaders, but also between ministers and leaders. But what about the civil society side of things? What about the young people's voices? Are you in your organizations, and I'll start with you, Bala, really bringing the voice of young people, listening to them, changing or maybe adapting your policies in view of what young people's desires and aspirations are for ASEAN, but also for ASEAN-Europe relations? Screen's yours.
Thank you, Shada. Indeed, as I mentioned, that is why I highlighted the importance of people-to-people linkages at the very beginning. In particular, focus to students, the young people of different from the different sector. So we in ASEAN, we engage the youth in different segments, whether it is on the environment, on the climate, because we need their voices, we need their push. Because I think policymakers alone, I know we at the policy level and policymakers, we are working on multiple areas or multiple sectors. But I think, as you mentioned correctly, the voices of the young people are important, whether it's in the issue of digital divide, for example, because this is the future. The digitalization will involve the young people. So we have to listen to them. We need to address their concerns, and we need to find ways for them to be involved. And as mentioned, I think Petrus mentioned earlier, is also involving the young people in the environment sector for the climate. I think the voices of the young people are important. So ASEAN, in our own way, I mean, we have many programs that are being run throughout ASEAN, trying to bring the young people into the mainstream, particularly to hear their voices, whether it's digital, whether it's climate, whether it's the environment, whether it's the connectivity, whether it's even human rights for the matter. So we are engaging the young people in different ways. I think the leaders of ASEAN, from time to time, they also take time to engage the young, the youth of ASEAN, to listen to them. So I think we cannot detach the young people from the work that we do.
Right. But if I could just have a quick follow-up, because a very interesting for both of you, actually, I'll come to you in a minute, Petrus, but I want to hear Bala finish this conversation. One of the questions that come in is that, you know, I did mention at the beginning about democratic backsliding in both ASEAN and the EU. And of course, the question of democracy, human rights, rule of law is a very important question for young people in both continents, in Asia and in Europe. So the question really is, do civil society actors, how will you be engaging on these issues with young people and then taking their concerns to the leaders? Thank you very much, Bala. And then I'll come to you, Petrus. Thank you.
Thank you, Shada. This is an important question. As I said a little earlier, the engagement with the young people is something that we continue to do it at all fronts. Democracy, rule of law, human rights, good governance. These are issues. As you know, in ASEAN, we have an ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights. So there is the work done by the Commission, engaging various segments of our society, including the young people, to listen to their voices and listen to what they have to say and their contribution to these issues. So I know if I talk about this, my own region here in ASEAN, there are some perception about human rights and democracy here in
major challenges.
So as I mentioned earlier, these are challenges that we're going to continue to face. I'm not going to pretend to say that, oh, we are addressing everything is rosy and good and well here. It's not. I must say this very clearly. So this actually has a bearing on the peace and stability of our region. So this is, I don't want to go into details, but I would leave it here that, you know, this is an important issue that we are facing, focusing our attention to, and enough efforts are being done. I think more needs to be done, definitely. And at the policy level, we are paying attention to these issues.
Right.
It's not that we are sidestepping this issue because I don't want to talk about human rights and good governance and democracy.
Right.
We are, and we are not doing enough, I must say, and we need to do more. Thank you.
Thank you for being very honest, Bala, and taking the question very seriously. So, Petrus, the question really is also, these questions of human rights and democracy have always been difficult, and I can vouch for that in the EU-ASEAN partnership. So the question is, would it be correct to assume that common ground for cooperation has eroded even further with the advance of authoritarian tendencies and political polarization, both within the EU and in ASEAN member states? And then finally, also, if you could come to the question of how young people need to be more involved and how you're taking their voices into your views, please.
Thank you very much. I think we definitely see different kind of parameters and developments all around the world, either it would be in Europe or in ASEAN or elsewhere, of degrading democratic patterns. That's true. Having said that, if we look at the bilateral track record between EU and ASEAN individual member states, our track record on discussing human rights is very strong. And we could go country by country, that actually human rights dialogues are taking place on yearly basis. Either it would be Laos, either it would be Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, you name it. Our dialogue is very strong, and it has no taboos on the agenda. Either those would be democratic values, role of the civil society, death penalties, registration of civil society organizations. All those topics which are really important for us as well as individual ASEAN countries, we raise them, we discuss them. And we see that actually it is not only discussions taking place around the table in the closed rooms. There are action plans we agree as a follow-up on those dialogues, and we pursue them in concrete actions years following. Either it would be in the UN, either it would be individual in the countries. So dialogue on human rights and society, civil society participation in the societies of the countries is really strong. Therefore, although perception might be that democratic, let's say, grounds are shrinking, our dialogue is strong, and I don't see the reasons for thinking that actually it would be diminishing. Second point on the youth. Youth is playing an important role, and this is not a lip service for this discussion. First of all, it is a good time, I think, to mention that, of course, we will have Youth Leaders Forum on the eve of the EU-ASEAN Summit here in Brussels on the 13th of December. We look forward to welcome the youth to Brussels and continue our discussions. It is not for the first time we have the engagement with youth. We have the programs, either EU-ASEAN Share or Erasmus+. Those are already activities for many years which contribute to people-to-people, youth-to-youth contacts. Having said that, our Commissioner Jutta Urpilainen decided to set up Youth Sounding Board for international partnerships, and she uses that advice coming from the youth participants in order to bring it into the overall policy setting. So those youth sounding boards are there, and we are very much happy to see that she appointed youth advisor for herself, which comes from Malaysia. So it has also strong ASEAN link, and our delegations in the fields in ASEAN, individual countries as well as in Jakarta, have very strong mandate in engaging with the youth. And I As I travel and I talk to the Commissioner quite often, I see that she is very determined on every occasion to have meetings with youth as part of their visit. Again, this is the way how Commissioner wants to make the points. We are celebrating this year the Youth Year in the European Union. Right. We will come up with very soon with the Youth Action Plan. So we see that actually that engagement is something what we need to make sure as strong activity with everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And on that bright note, I'd like to thank both of you, Bala and Petrus. I know both of you are now 1 minute past the deadline that you had set for yourselves. So I would really like to thank both of you for having a very frank and, I have to say, constructive discussion. And I'm really looking forward to engaging with you once again ahead of the Brussels summit. So if you need to rush, please, you can do so. I release you from your obligations. Thank you for joining us. Let's just give them a big hand of applause and thanks. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you.
Now, thank you. Bye-bye. Take care. Thank you again. Now, friends, we've come to an end of a very interesting session. I really enjoyed this panel. I have to say, very frank, very open, very constructive, looking at what brings us together, but also areas where we still have to reach common ground. But that's the value of this EU-ASEAN partnership. 45 years and a summit in Brussels, including a Youth Leaders Forum, where I look forward to seeing you finally face-to-face after these months of acting with you, interacting with you online. Thank you for your questions, by the way. I'm sorry if I couldn't bring all of them to the table, but I think we really have looked at some of the key areas that we need to explore further in the run-up to the summit. Now, during this week, as I said earlier, you're going to have a number of discussions going further, exploring further some of the questions that Petrus and Bala have talked about. The 6 themes, you know them now by heart: democratic governance, security, connectivity, trade, economics, health, and Green Deal, of course, climate change. So enjoy those conversations. I'll be seeing some of you back on October the 11th. You can keep up with the Young Leaders work on social networks, Facebook and LinkedIn, of course, and also on this website. And as I said, thank you very much indeed for participating, for your questions, and for making this forum such a vibrant and dynamic place for ideas, exchanges, and for frank and open conversations. Thank you, take care, and stay healthy. Bye-bye.